Dad, perfect events. The call came at 9:47 on a Thursday morning in November. I was in my workshop behind the house in Minneapolis, putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair for my granddaughter, when my phone buzzed against the workbench. Is this Bradley Pearce speaking? This is Sergeant Lisa Hartley with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I need you to come down to Regina General Hospital. There's been a situation. I set down my sandpaper. What kind of situation? Sir, we have a deceased individual here, a young man. His identification lists you as his father. The workshop suddenly felt smaller. I think there's been a mistake. I have 2 daughters. I don't have a son. There was a pause. I could hear papers rustling. Mr. Pearce, the deceased, is listed as Nathan Rivers, born April 15, 1992. You're listed as the biological father on his emergency contact information. The year my first marriage ended. The year everything went sideways with my ex-wife Jennifer before I met Helen. He had your phone number written on a piece of paper in his wallet, Mr. Pearce. We really need someone to come down. My name is Bradley Pearce. I'm 58 years old, and I'd lived my whole life thinking I had 2 daughters, Nancy, 35, and Ruth, 32, from my first marriage. My second wife, Helen, and I had been married for 18 years. Helen is 49, and I thought I knew everything about my life. I was wrong. I'll be there in 6 hours, I told the sergeant. The drive from Minneapolis to Regina felt like it took forever. Helen asked why I was going, and I told her what little I knew. She looked shocked, said she couldn't believe it, said she'd never heard me mention having a son. Neither had I. The hospital's morgue was colder than I expected. Sergeant Hartley met me at the entrance, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes that had seen too much. Mr. Pearce, I appreciate you coming. Before we proceed, I need to ask, did you know you had a son? No. My first wife Jennifer and I divorced in 1992. She never told me she was pregnant. Hartley nodded slowly. The deceased was found in his apartment 3 days ago. Apparent suicide. No note initially, but we found some documents that we think you should see first. She led me to a small office. On the desk was a manila envelope. We can't legally give you these, but we can show them to you. After that, if you can identify the body, we'll need you to sign some paperwork. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies, a birth certificate, Nathan Marcus Rivers, born April 15, 1992, in Regina General Hospital. Mother, Jennifer Lynn Pearce. Father, Bradley James Pearce. That was my full name. There were more papers, adoption records. My eyes scanned the text, but the words didn't make sense at first. Then they did, and I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Jennifer had put Nathan up for adoption 6 weeks after he was born. She'd signed my name on the consent forms, forged my signature. The adoptive parents were listed as Scott Anderson and Patricia Anderson of Calgary. Mr. Pearce? Hartley's voice seemed far away. Are you all right? She gave away my son. She forged my name and gave away my son. I'm very sorry. Are you ready? I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. The morgue attendant pulled back the sheet and I saw my own face staring back at me. 32 years younger, but unmistakable. He had my nose, my jawline, my mother's gray eyes. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow that I had in the exact same place from a childhood accident. My son. My knees buckled. Hartley caught my arm. It's him, I whispered. That's my son. I signed papers I barely read. They gave me another envelope. This one had been found in Nathan's apartment, addressed to me. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I drove to a coffee shop, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, then finally opened the letter. It was dated 1 week before his death. Dear Bradley Pearce, I don't know if I should call you Dad or Mr. Pearce or just Bradley. I've practiced writing this letter 63 times. My name is Nathan. I'm your son. I found out 8 months ago. I was doing one of those DNA ancestry tests for fun. You know the kind, you spit in a tube. I wasn't looking for you. I had decent parents. Scott and Patricia Anderson raised me okay. I had a normal childhood in Calgary, went to college, became a teacher. I had no major complaints about my life, but the DNA test connected me to some cousins on my biological father's side. They told me about you. They gave me your name. I hired a private investigator. That's how I found out about Jennifer Pearce, my birth mother. The investigator found the adoption records, found out she'd forged your signature, found out you never knew I existed. But he found out something else too. Mr. Pearce, my birth mother didn't just give me away. She sold me. The investigator tracked down a lawyer named Trevor Walsh who handled my adoption. He's retired now, living in Vancouver. When pressed, he admitted that he paid Jennifer $18,000 for me. He then charged the Andersons $28,000 for legal fees and arrangements. It was a black market adoption. I confronted the Andersons. They had no idea. They thought it was legitimate. They had been told it was an expensive private adoption because Jennifer wanted to ensure I went to a good family. They paid the money because they'd been trying to have a child for 9 years. They were desperate. They're decent people. They didn't know. I kept digging. Trevor Walsh wasn't working alone. There was a nurse at Regina General named Carol Stevens. She identified young, unmarried mothers who were struggling, women who might be convinced to give up their babies for money. She'd approach them, offer them a way out, promise them their babies would go to loving, wealthy families. Jennifer was one of them, but here's what made me sick. It didn't stop with me. The investigator found records of at least 41 other babies sold through this network between 1989 and 1999. 41 children, sold like livestock. Trevor Walsh kept detailed records hidden in his lake house, coded in ledgers. The investigator found them. I reported everything to the RCMP 4 weeks ago. They've opened an investigation. Walsh and Carol Stevens will be arrested soon. But here's the thing, Mr. Pearce. Here's what I discovered that I can't live with. I found out about your wife, Helen. Mr. Pearce, your wife knew about me. I hired the investigator to dig deeper after I found the adoption records. He discovered that in 2010, Helen somehow found out about my existence. She tracked down Jennifer and convinced her to take additional money, another $15,000, to make sure I never contacted you. Your wife paid my birth mother to keep me away from you. The investigator has bank records. Helen used your joint account. 3 transfers of $5,000 each in 2010, 2015, and 2020. Always to Jennifer, always with the same message. Keep the boy away. Helen knew I existed for 14 years. She knew, and she made sure you never found out. I tried to understand it. Maybe she was protecting your marriage. Maybe she thought it would hurt your daughters to know they had a brother. But Mr. Pearce, she knew I was out there, and she chose to leave me in the dark. I drove to Minneapolis twice. I parked outside your house. I saw you in your workshop. I saw Helen gardening. I saw what looked like a happy family, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. But I also couldn't live with knowing that the woman you trust most in the world has been lying to you for over a decade. I'm writing this because I need you to know the truth. I need you to know that I existed, that I was real, that Jennifer sold me, and Helen made sure I stayed sold. I've given all the evidence to the RCMP. They have everything. Walsh and Carol Stevens will face justice. But I don't know what will happen about Helen. I'm sorry I couldn't be brave enough to meet you in person. I'm sorry you're finding out this way. I'm sorry for all of it. Tell. My sisters. I wish I'd known them. Nathan. I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours reading and rereading that letter. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the paper. Every word felt like a knife in my chest. Helen knew. For 14 years, she knew I had a son, and she made damn sure I never found out. I called Sergeant Hartley. My voice was barely a whisper. I need to know everything. I need copies of everything you found. I need to see the investigation files. Mr. Pearce, I can't just... That was my son. Someone stole my son and sold him, and apparently my wife helped cover it up. I need to know everything. There was a long pause. Come back to the station? I'll see what I can do. The drive back to Regina General felt like I was driving through fog. Nothing seemed real. When I got there, Hartley had photocopies waiting for me. Bank records, emails Helen thought she'd deleted, phone records going back years. The evidence was overwhelming. In 2009, Helen had hired a private investigator to dig into my past. She was paranoid that I might have other secrets from my first marriage. When the investigator found records suggesting Jennifer had been pregnant in 1992, Helen tracked down Jennifer herself. That's when she learned about Nathan. Instead of telling me, Helen made a deal with Jennifer. She'd pay Jennifer to keep quiet about Nathan. And in exchange, Jennifer would never contact me or try to get money from our family. But Helen went further than that. She actually contacted Trevor Walsh and Carol Stevens. She wanted to make sure that even if Nathan ever tried to find me, there would be no trail leading back to our family. Helen had actively participated in keeping my son away from me for 14 years. Over the next 4 weeks, I learned more than I wanted to know. Nathan's investigation had been thorough. The RCMP had already been building a case against Trevor Walsh and Carol Stevens. Nathan's evidence just gave them what they needed to make arrests. But the revelation about Helen, that was new information that changed everything. I didn't confront Helen right away. Instead, I hired my own investigator, a guy named Curtis Reed who specialized in financial crimes. I needed to know exactly what Helen had done and when. Curtis was good. Within 10 days, he had everything. Bank records going back to 2009, phone records, email accounts Helen thought she'd deleted, text messages between Helen and Jennifer going back 15 years. The truth was worse than Nathan's letter suggested. Helen hadn't just found out about Nathan by accident. She'd been systematic about it. She'd tracked down not just Jennifer, but also Trevor Walsh, Carol Stevens, and even the Anderson family. She knew exactly where Nathan lived, what school he taught at, who his friends were. She'd been monitoring my son's life for over a decade, making sure he never got close to finding me. Curtis helped me set up what he called a legal trap. We arranged for Helen to meet with Jennifer. Curtis had tracked down Jennifer in Edmonton. We told Helen that Jennifer was threatening to expose some old secrets unless she got more money. Helen took the bait. Curtis had recording equipment set up in the restaurant where they met. Helen walked right into it. She admitted everything on tape. She admitted paying Jennifer. She admitted knowing about Nathan. She admitted contacting Walsh and Stevens to help cover up the adoption. But the worst part, the part that made me realize my marriage was over, was when Helen said she didn't care if Nathan lived or died, as long as he stayed away from us. She said those exact words, "I don't care if the kid lives or dies. He can't be allowed to contact Bradley, ever." When I heard that recording, I knew I wasn't just dealing with deception. I was dealing with something much darker. The RCMP arrested Trevor Walsh and Carol Stevens in December. Both were charged with human trafficking, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The investigation uncovered 43 children. Total, not 41. Nathan had missed 2 in his research. I turned over all of Curtis's evidence to the police. Helen was arrested in January on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to human trafficking. The look on her face when the police showed up at our door. She knew exactly why they were there. She didn't even try to deny it. "How long have you known?" was all she asked. "Long enough," I told her. "The trial lasted 7 months. It was hell." Trevor Walsh was 71 years old, unrepentant to the end. His lawyer argued he'd provided a service, connecting children with loving families. He showed no remorse for what he'd done to 43 families. Carol Stevens was 64. She claimed she'd been helping desperate women, giving them options they wouldn't have had otherwise. She actually had the nerve to say she was performing a public service. Helen's defense was that she'd been protecting our family. She claimed she'd done it all out of love for me and our daughters. Her lawyer painted her as a devoted wife who made difficult choices to preserve her family's happiness. None of them acknowledged the real trauma they'd caused, the families torn apart, the children who grew up not knowing their origins, the fathers who never got the chance to raise their sons, the mothers who were exploited when they were most vulnerable. Nathan's name came up in court dozens of times. Every time I heard it, I felt that same punch to the gut. My son. The son I never knew existed until it was too late. The Andersons testified. Scott and Patricia Anderson, the people who'd raised Nathan, flew down from Calgary to tell the court about the son they'd loved and lost. They talked about how Nathan had become withdrawn in the months before his death, how he'd stopped showing up to family dinners, how he'd seemed to be carrying some terrible weight. "He was a good boy," Patricia said through tears. "He was kind to everyone. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He stayed after school to help struggling students. He didn't deserve to die thinking he was unwanted." Nancy and Ruth testified too. They talked about growing up never knowing they had a brother. Ruth broke down on the stand when she described learning about Nathan after his death. "I keep thinking about all the Christmases he wasn't there," she said. "All the birthdays, all the times we could have been a family." I testified for 2 days. I told the court about finding out I had a son through a phone call from the RCMP. I read Nathan's letter out loud in court. By the time I finished, half the jury was crying. Helen's lawyer tried to make me look like a bad husband, like someone who would have abandoned Nathan if I'd known about him. I set him straight real quick. I raised 2 daughters as a single father for 6 years after my first divorce, I told him. I never missed a parent-teacher conference, never missed a soccer game, never missed a bedtime story. If I'd known Nathan existed, he would have been raised with the same love. Helen stole that from both of us. In August, the verdicts came down. Trevor Walsh was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. At his age, that's basically a life sentence. Carol Stevens received 14 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to the affected families. Helen got 6 years and was ordered to pay $400,000 in civil damages to me and $100,000 to the Anderson family. Our house had to be sold to cover the damages and legal fees. The day Helen was sentenced, she looked at me across the courtroom. For a second, I thought she might finally show some remorse. Instead, she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry you found out. Not sorry for what she did. Sorry I found out." That was the moment I knew there was nothing left of the woman I had thought I married. I used part of the settlement money to create the Nathan Rivers Memorial Foundation. The rest went into a trust fund for my granddaughter's education. We worked to reform adoption laws, provide support for separated families, and prevent illegal adoptions. In the first year, we helped reunite 52 families. Not all of them were from Walsh's network. There were other cases of fraud, coercion, and deception out there. Every time we helped someone find their truth, I thought of Nathan. Curtis Reed, the investigator who'd helped me gather evidence on Helen, joined the foundation as our chief investigator. He said Nathan's case was the most systematic cover-up he'd ever seen, and he wanted to make sure it never happened again. "Your son didn't die for nothing," Curtis told me. His investigation brought down a network that had been operating for over a decade. The evidence he gathered will help prevent this from happening to other families. The other families affected by Walsh's network reached out to me. We formed a support group, meeting monthly at first, then quarterly. Some of the stories were heartbreaking, others were hopeful. All of them mattered. Jessica Martinez had been sold for $12,000 in 1994. Her adoptive parents had paid $45,000, thinking it was all legal fees. She'd only found out the truth when her adoptive mother confessed on her deathbed. Jessica was now helping other adoptees navigate DNA testing and family searches. Dale Thompson had grown up in an abusive adoptive home. His adoptive parents had treated him like property they had purchased. When he learned the truth about how much money had changed hands for his adoption, he said it finally made sense why they had always made him feel like he owed them something. Not all the stories were tragic. Some of the children had wonderful adoptive families who had no idea their adoption wasn't completely legal. Those families were victims too. But they all deserved to know the truth. They all deserved to understand their stories. The foundation kept growing. We helped change legislation in 4 states. We provided funding for DNA testing services to help adoptees find biological relatives. We created educational programs about ethical adoption practices for social workers and lawyers. We also started working with law enforcement to identify other illegal adoption networks. Curtis had contacts in agencies across the country, and Nathan's case had opened doors that had been closed before. Turns out, Walsh's network wasn't the only one operating during those years. Every month, I got updates on Helen. She was serving her time in a federal facility in Kentucky. She'd been denied parole twice. The parole board said she showed no genuine remorse for her actions. That didn't surprise me. Nancy and Ruth visited me more often after the trial. We talked about Nathan regularly now, keeping his memory alive. Nancy had been pregnant during the trial, and when her son was born, she asked if she could name him Nathan Bradley. "He deserves to be remembered in our family," she said. I cried when she told me. Good tears, for once. Ruth started volunteering with the foundation. She had a background in social work, and she was good at helping families navigate the emotional aspects of reunion. She said it was her way of honoring the brother she'd never got to meet. "I can't give Nathan back his life," she told me, "but I can help other families not lose the time we lost." 2 years after the trial, I got a call from the Anderson family. Scott had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital. Patricia asked if I'd come to Calgary to visit him. When I got there, Scott was weak but alert. He took my hand and squeezed it. "I want you to know," he said, "Nathan was proud to be your son. In those last months when he was investigating everything, he'd talk about you. He said he could see himself in your face in the photos he'd found. He said he understood where his love of working with his hands came from. Patricia nodded. He'd found pictures of you online, from when your daughter Ruth graduated college. He said you looked like the kind of man he'd have been proud to call dad. That conversation meant more to me than any court verdict ever could. 3 years after Nathan's death, I decided to do something I'd been putting off. I drove up to the spot near the University of Calgary where Nathan had liked to go when he needed to think. Patricia had told me about it, a quiet place by the Bow River where he'd go to grade papers or just sit and watch the water. I brought Nathan's ashes. I'd been keeping them in my workshop, but it didn't feel right anymore. He belonged somewhere he'd chosen, somewhere that had meant something to him. Ruth and Nancy drove up from Minneapolis. The Andersons were there. Some of Nathan's friends from Calgary came, teachers from his school, kids from the soccer team he'd coached. Curtis Reed drove up from Denver, where he was working on another case. Jessica Martinez flew in from Phoenix. We stood by the river and shared stories about Nathan. His friend Marcus told us about how Nathan had spent his own money to buy soccer equipment for kids whose families couldn't afford it. A teacher named Carol talked about how Nathan had started a program to help struggling students with their reading. Emma, Nathan's girlfriend, read a poem Nathan had written about finding family. She said he'd written it after he'd started his investigation, but before he'd found the truth about Helen. In the poem, he wrote about how family isn't just blood. It's about the people who choose to love you. He wrote about how the Andersons had chosen him, and how he hoped that someday his biological family would choose him too. I spread his ashes in the river at sunset. As we watched them disappear into the current, Ruth played guitar and sang Amazing Grace. Nathan had told the Andersons it was his favorite hymn. He's free now, Patricia said. He's finally free. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry. The answer is complicated. Yes, I'm angry. Helen stole 14 years I could have known my son. She made a decision that cost Nathan his life and robbed me of the chance to be his father when he needed one. But I'm also angry at the system that allowed it to happen, at Trevor Walsh, who preyed on vulnerable women, at Carol Stevens, who betrayed her position of trust, at the agencies that didn't ask enough questions, at a legal system that made it possible for people to buy and sell children. Anger at one person is easy. Anger at a whole broken system is harder to carry, but it's the kind of anger that can actually change things. The Nathan Rivers Memorial Foundation has now helped reunite 127 families. We've provided counseling services to over 300 people affected by illegal adoptions. We've trained more than 500 social workers and legal professionals in ethical adoption practices. Last month, we got word that another illegal adoption network had been shut down in Arizona, partly because of investigative techniques we'd developed. 15 children were going to get answers about their origins because of work that started with Nathan's letter. I keep that letter in my wallet. I've read it so many times the paper is starting to wear at the folds. Sometimes I take it out and just hold it, this piece of my son that I have. I'm 61 now. I've been retired for 3 years, but the foundation work keeps me busier than I ever was building furniture. Every family we help, every law we change, every child who gets to grow up knowing their truth. That's Nathan's legacy. I never thought I had a son, but for 32 years, somewhere in this world, a young man named Nathan Rivers existed. He had my eyes, my name, my stubborn streak. He was a teacher, a coach, a friend to everyone who knew him. He was loved by the family who raised him. He should have been loved by me, too. I carry that loss every day. Not just the loss of Nathan, but the loss of all the years we could have had. The birthdays I missed, the graduations, the quiet conversations, the chance to teach him how to use my tools, to pass on what my father had taught me. Helen took that from both of us. But Nathan's legacy is fighting back. Every family we reunite, every law we change, every person we help find their truth, that's him still making a difference. That's my promise to the son I never knew. Not revenge, not bitterness. Just making sure that the next father gets to hold his son while he's still alive. Just making sure that the next child doesn't have to die to be heard. Nathan Marcus Rivers, April 15th, 1992 to November 18th, 2024. My son. Because in the end, the greatest tragedy isn't death. It's living a lie that steals love from those who deserve it most. And sometimes the most important thing a father can do for his son is make sure no other father has to learn his child's name from a stranger's phone call.